5.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the end of hurricane season broadcast. I'm Jim Williams. I'll be with you for about the next hour or so, going over I want to focus on really the three big storms of the 2022 hurricane season. And that is, of course, Ian. Everybody knows what happened there in Southwest Florida. We had Hurricane Fiona pound Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, the eastern Bahamas, and head up towards Nova Scotia. And then late in the season, we had Hurricane Nicole hit just north of here in Vero Beach and did a lot of damage north of Cape Canaveral on the beaches there. So we're going to talk about these three storms mainly. But, you know, I've been doing this for 25 years. This is 25 years now of covering hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin from HurricaneCity.com. And, you know, I've been doing this online since 1997. I created the main Hurricane City in 1998, and the rest, most of you viewers already know the whole story of Hurricane City. But, you know, when I was 15 years old, I started talking into a microphone into a tape recorder, you know, and I was thinking, wow, you know, I would make forecasts and I would talk about I would stick the microphone up to the TV like a lot of people did when they were a kid, you know, and record when a hurricane threat was there, and you record it and you play it back and you think, boy, that sounds stupid. And I hope that that's not the case now, but I just look back to when I was 15 years old. I had a hurricane map on the wall just like I have behind me, and I'm thinking, you know, you get older and your passion for something really doesn't change very much. But the similarities are, believe it or not, that, you know, when I talked into that microphone, into that tape recorder when I was a kid, I knew that nobody was listening, that it was just me, you know, feeding it back to myself. But you know what? I kind of get the feeling like that sometimes with social media. Like, I'm literally talking to myself. Twitter, for example, I've been on there since 2009. Now my audience hasn't grown very much. It's been pathetic. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I got like a little over 3,000 followers, and since Elon Musk got involved, I've had the numbers drop off. So I'm beginning to wonder if I'm even going to stay on Twitter at all. I just don't really see any value in it because I don't really get much feedback. However, on Facebook, I get at least a conversation. I can post something on Facebook about hurricanes, and at least I can feel like somebody's going to have something to say. Either they like it, or they disagree, or they agree, or hey, that's interesting, or can you tell me another statistic or something like that. But on Twitter, it's crickets, man. Twitter is like a soundboard for a lot of meteorologists, but they don't listen. Nobody listens on Twitter. I get in there and I comment on a lot of people's things, on what they say and what they're talking about. I feel like when I'm posting stats or whatever I have to say about the current hurricane situation, it just gets, I guess, lost in there's so many people talking about it that you feel like it's lost. Now, I know there are people that are going to say, and by the way, the comments are open tonight. If you'd like to say something, I'll post it up on the screen here from either Facebook, we're on YouTube tonight, and on the live embedded page, which you cannot comment on the message features on that page, but you can from YouTube and Facebook on my timeline. But you know, when it comes to having a conversation, I think about Facebook and Twitter. They're two different places. First of all, Facebook allows you to have much more to say. You can write a whole, you could write a book on Facebook, basically, and post 4 or 5 images. On Twitter, you can't really do that. I know Elon Musk is allowed now more, I think 480 characters now as opposed to 280 or something, so that's better. In fact, Twitter did increase the character count. Remember, back in the beginning, it was like, I think it was like 180 or 130 characters, and then it went up to 180, and now it's 280. And now Elon wants to raise it to 480, which will be good. So there are some good things that he has proposed, but my reason for wanting to get off Twitter is not so much about Elon Musk and what he's doing over there. and what may come down the road. It's more about feeling like there's no conversation over there. And it reminds me of talking into that tape recorder. And so, you know, I might just stick to Facebook and do YouTube videos and whatnot, and that might be the future. I don't know. Um, I have stats to pass along. Some people don't pay attention. Let me give you an example. Fort Myers, they were hit hard by Hurricane Ian, okay? And their return rate is once every 8.82 years for a named storm. That's for hurricanes only. Every little over 8 years, almost 9 years, a hurricane core will come over Fort Myers, right? So the last time they were affected was back in 2017 as Irma came up there with 100-mile-per-hour winds. Different animal, but nevertheless, it's a core of a hurricane. So Ian hit within its hurricane return rate for that particular city. Now, what's really amazing is major hurricane return rate for Fort Myers is every 16.67 years. That's going back 150 years. So the last time they were hit by a major was 2005 Hurricane Wilma. Guess what? That's 17 years exactly. Bingo! That's why these statistics matter. It doesn't always tell you when a hurricane is going to hit, but it can give you some guidance, and that's why my predictions were so good over the years, is using those statistical analysis along with the North Atlantic Oscillation, ENSO analogs, and on, to come up with my predictions. They were really good. I stopped doing them this year, but had I been doing them, I would have definitely had Vero Beach, which was hit by Hurricane Nicole, based on the fact that they were way overdue for a hurricane by 10 years, so that would have just automatically hit my top 20, and then calculating it, it probably would have moved into the top 5. I don't know that for certain. Nova Scotia would have been within the return rate, and Fort Myers was not within its return rate, but it was due for a major, and that would have been interesting to see if I would have had that in there. But I don't just come up with these on a whim. It takes a lot of work to come up with these predictions before the season starts. So I just couldn't do it this year. I got kind of burnt out, and I don't think that there was a lot of support for what I was doing out there. I wasn't getting any feedback on it, especially on Twitter. Like I said, crickets over there. I wasn't really getting any feedback, negative, positive, any other way. So I figured, you know what? It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. The amount of time that goes into it, I run a business. Everybody knows this. I don't have the time to put into it. And it's a struggle to come up with this stuff and to keep up with each storm as the season progresses, and to chime in on it on social media, only to be completely no interaction whatsoever. So I mean, for me to put the amount of time in that's required on social media, it was a game changer when social media came out around 2010. I mean, of course it was around before that, but I mean, that's when everything switched. 2010 was like a switch that took place. And it just completely changed everything that I do. And the past 10 years have been such a struggle with Hurricane City that, I just had to start trimming some things back, and I wasn't really getting a lot of support. I adore you supporters out there, that have donated over the years, but I don't feel comfortable panhandling. It's not the way I roll. And I'm not into social media. I don't take on advertisers. I did in the early days. It's a different dynamic now in this whole industry. But, and for those of you that don't know, I was involved in a serious accident on the way to Hurricane Ian, and it shut my season down, basically. But I still kept on. I kept my cameras up in the area where the accident happened, and was able to get Hurricane Ian, the eye as it passed over, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but it's been, on a personal level, it's been just a terrible stretch here the past several years, and it's a struggle even to come on tonight to do this show, but it was I think about this, like, okay, the people in Fort Myers and Sanibel Island, in the barrier islands that really got hammered hard, even the coastal Naples area up into Port Charlotte, I think of areas like that people had their whole house wiped away. They lost all their belongings. They lost loved ones. 140 people plus. I think it's up to 150 now that died from Ian. But most of the majority of those happened in Southwest Florida. So these people lost everything. And I was just in a bad accident. You know, it took its toll on me, but I felt like I had to do this show tonight because of what happened this year. I mean, this was a devastating hurricane that hit Southwest Florida. And of course, Fiona was really bad for Puerto Rico and for Nova Scotia, Eastern Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos. And, you know, we'll touch a little bit on Nicole. But it was a bad season for a lot of people. And I feel like I need to come on here tonight and go over some of the images and what I gathered during the hurricane season statistically and whatnot, and try to just let people know what I was gathering during the hurricane season and what my method was during the hurricane season, and just talk about the victims. Oh, by the way, Bill was not able to be with me tonight. He's been doing a lot of traveling, and he's had some health issues during the hurricane season, which is one of the things, we went back and forth about whether that would have worked out with him coming with me for Ian, because I was on the way over there. And had he been with me, the passenger side of that truck, the whole truck got destroyed. But, I mean, the passenger side was annihilated. That might not have turned out well. On the other hand, we talked about, had he been down here, we might have left a little later, and it might not have, I would have never ran into that intersection at that moment when that woman ran the red light. So it would have just never happened, probably, if he had come here. But however, you never know how things work, and you can sit there and pull your hair out of your head over stuff like this and think about what could have happened if this wasn't delayed, if that wasn't delayed, if, it just is what it is. I mean, it's still ongoing problem, and I don't know if it'll be resolved by next hurricane season. And I'm not going to really discuss what's going to happen next hurricane season because I don't know personally what's going to happen with me and my whole situation going into next year. But I do care about hurricanes, and I still will be talking about them regardless of whether I'm out there intercepting them or not. So anyway, it's 8:15. People are probably still coming in. Again, this will be archived. It'll be on the archive page on Hurricane City. Use the drop-down menus, and you can choose video archives. That goes to all the shows I've done over the past 25 years, all the way back to 98 when I chased with Jeff Gammons to Hurricane George up in Mississippi, and all the interviews I've done over the years with people in the weather business, and it goes on and on and on. Let's go ahead and get to some images here. And last hurricane season, 2021, all of the activity was like over here, right? And this year, it was all focused in here and out over the Atlantic. So completely different situation this year than last year, obviously. And we had two majors out there. We had Hurricane Fiona and Hurricane Ian, of course. And we had one hurricane pop up here out in the northeast Atlantic, way far north. That was developing north of 40, I think 35 north. Yeah, 35 north. And let's see, we had some, it's interesting, down here in the Southwest Caribbean, down in Nicaragua, we had Hurricane Julia. That's right, Hurricane Julia down there in Nicaragua. And generally, in really active hurricane seasons, Nicaragua tends to get hit. And they get hit in really slow hurricane seasons too. But when you have average seasons, they rarely get hit. So this was kind of an anomaly down here to have a hurricane in an average storm name season. 14 named storms is the average, to have that area hit by a hurricane. Then, of course, Belize had one over here. But the three big stories were, look, it was Hurricane Nicole, Hurricane Ian, and Hurricane Fiona down here. And, of course, up in Nova Scotia when it became post-tropical. But these were the three, there's too many circles on the map, it's got to be confusing. But anyway, those were the three big stories of the Atlantic hurricane season. I draw this every year to show what areas have been impacted during the hurricane season, and I like to compare it to past seasons. So this was the 139 plus cities in the Hurricane City database. The small red circles that you can barely see are areas that were unaffected in 2022, and the dark red circles, of course, are areas that were impacted in 2022. And I mean, you can see Florida had a bullseye on it this year. That was just the target between Nicole and Ian. Florida won out. South Carolina also got impacted by Hurricane Ian and Nicole, and Ian also impacted eastern North Carolina. Fiona was mainly the Eastern Caribbean and Central Caribbean. And then, of course, you had Lisa in Belize and Julia down in Nicaragua and Bonnie early in the hurricane season. But you know what? Let me go back to that map for a second. One thing I wanted to point out of this map, remember when the beginning of the hurricane season, everybody was like, in fact, let me get my camera shot back up here. Everybody was, talking like, the season's over. I mean, I really didn't see season over threads on social media, but I had the feeling a lot of people were like, uh-oh, this isn't going to be the active hurricane season that everybody was talking about. And going back to my predictions, I'm kind of thinking, I don't know how many named storms I would have predicted. I am pretty good at that, by the way. I probably would have gone somewhere in the high teens. That would have been probably where I would have went with this. And that does factor into my city predictions. So I probably would have been wrong in that aspect of it because I don't think I would have picked 14 named storms. Everybody was saying this is going to be really active season or hyperactive. Now, NOAA had anywhere between 14 and 20, and you know how everybody knows how I feel about NOAA's predictions. I mean, you can't give that wide of a range and then say, yes, we got it right. Going from 14 to 20 to me seems a little bit too wide of a range. Now, Klotzbach goes with one set of named storms. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but he was off as well. And, and when it comes to Phil Klotzbach, and I've harped on this as well, and this is not a jealousy issue or anything like that. It's just simply stating every single year that guy is off by like 3 to 5 named storms. And they keep pushing him out there and saying, this is our guy. This is the guy that makes the hurricane predictions. Now, he does an excellent job statistically, but his predictions on the average named storms, it's terrible. It's terrible. He's off by 3 to 5 named storms every year. And then he readjusts it as the season goes on, which is kind of cheating in my opinion. I think you should hold, if you say on June 1st, I expect this many storms, you should stick to that. But he changes it in August, and I think he even gives an update later than that. I'm not really sure, but I do my predictions on June 1st, and then that's the end of it. I don't adjust it. I don't make any. But it's interesting that we ended up with 14 because, again, looking at this graphic, you can see that we had Alex in June, tropical storm. We had tropical storm Bonnie down in Nicaragua in early July, and then tropical storm Colin. But then after that, we went through all of July and then all of August. That's 2 whole months without any named storms. That's when all the rumbling started on the internet about, we're not going to see a lot of storms this year. Or the season over, season canceled, etc. All right, let me see. All right, let's put some of these comments up. Brian Railfin, hi everyone else. Here's somebody, Lava Command, actually, by climate evidence, a large reason for the Atlantic hurricane season being affected by Tonga eruption. I don't know, man. I just, I don't know in what way that you're implying that the eruption would have any effect. Are you trying to say that kept it quiet, perhaps? I would argue more that the wind shear and early in the season would cause that to happen, the dry air off Africa. I wouldn't put it in regards to an eruption causing the slow season. No, I wouldn't go there. Making more shear due to, okay, well, he clarified that. All right, there you go. Tonga had a ton of CO2 and water vapor in the upper air mass. Okay. Well, all right. Let's get to our next image. So this is interesting. This is from the European model seasonal forecast. This was issued back in early 2022, back in January of 2022. That's a pretty damn good job. I mean, that's the European model seasonal forecast, tropical storm density. A little bit off on the, Ian, came in like this, so just south of that red blob. And then, of course, Fiona came up like this, and then came up like that. So that they nailed the Fiona deal. And then they did nail a couple of these systems out here in the Northeast Atlantic that developed out there. So the European model back in January did a pretty damn good job. I don't know about this over here, though. The reduced value of the East Pack, it was pretty busy in the East Pack over there, so that was off, a little bit off. This isn't perfect, but pretty good. This is pretty good from the European model. All right, let's get to our next image here. All right, this is our first system we're going to talk about. That's Fiona. And Hurricane Fiona developed on September 12th as a tropical depression out in the East Atlantic. This is a true Cape Verde wave. It became a tropical storm Fiona and moved through the northern Leeward Islands and became a Category 1 and hit just southwest of Ponce, Puerto Rico as an 80-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Then it hit near eastern Dominican Republic. Now, my brother was in the Dominican Republic just recently, a few months back, and he mentioned that he didn't really see much damage at all, and he was in the eastern tip of Dominican Republic, right where the eye passed over, and he really didn't notice much damage at all. So I'm beginning to wonder, I mean, it was strengthening from a Cat 1 to a Cat 2 as it passed over the eastern Dominican Republic, and then it became a major hurricane in the Turks and Caicos. Now, I've scoured around for information on the Turks and Caicos. They're not talking about anything that happened this hurricane season on any of their news sites, so it must not be that bad in the Turks and Caicos, even though they were on the weak side of a Category 3. But it did pass over the Turks and Caicos before aiming for Bermuda, but it missed Bermuda far to the left, and then it hit up in Nova Scotia as a post-tropical storm, but it still had winds around 90 miles per hour. So here's where the closest approach was to Ponce, Puerto Rico, 21 nautical miles to the southwest of Ponce, and it was, at that time, 85-mile-per-hour hurricane. Notice the red circle and the little donut, that's the little red circle here, are hurricane force sustained winds that basically passed like this, as it passed to the southwest of Puerto Rico and clipped the southwest tip of the island. But tropical storm force winds extended over the entire island out here, and there were power outages over nearly the entire island. Now, again, the infrastructure is kind of weak. They're still recovering from Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, from back in 2017. So, I mean, it's a long process to get that whole infrastructure rebuilt, but they did lose power on most of the island during Hurricane Fiona. So here was the next position as it passed over the Turks and Caicos. Now, it did pass over eastern Hispaniola as a Category 1, Category 2. Then it strengthened, and it passed right over Grand Turk. Let's blow this up here. And you can see that again, the western eye wall out over here was the weaker winds, probably winds around 100 miles per hour, passed over the eastern Caicos, and Turks Island pretty much took the brunt of it right in here. But again, not a lot of information on what happened there in the Turks and Caicos, but it did pass over as a major hurricane, so it is considered a major hurricane hit. All right, and here's what happened up in Nova Scotia. So it was labeled as post-tropical, and generally they expand. Look at the large expanse of wind field as it passed over Nova Scotia. I mean, that's huge area out here of hurricane force winds. So Sable Island was hit. Halifax briefly had hurricane force winds, and when I say briefly, I mean they were right on the edge of it. They probably had mainly tropical storm force winds out of the northwest in Halifax. But Sydney, Nova Scotia really took the hardest hit. The whole eastern Nova Scotia really took a hard hit from Hurricane Fiona. And again, winds around 80, 90 miles per hour were coming in from the southeast. I had people that were sending me images of, one guy sent me an image of the forest completely flattened in eastern Nova Scotia, and claimed it was tornadoes. I don't buy that, because when this system passed over Sydney, it was becoming somewhat of a cold core, hybrid system, and they generally you don't see a lot of tornadoes with systems like this. I think it was mainly straight line winds out of the south. It was such a tremendous fetch coming in here from the southeast and south that's probably what caused a lot of the damage is straight line winds. This thing was booking off to the north really fast. And that adds to the wind speed at the surface as well. So, and then of course over on the back side of this, we had the winds offshore. So you don't have the surge problem. It was mainly just basically over here where the surge was that came into Sydney. But it was mainly a wind event for the people of Sydney. And a lot of these areas are elevated, and surge is, not a real big problem unless you get down into the Halifax area. This was a Hurricane Juan a few years back, caused a lot of damage there from storm surge. All right. So here are the final models on Hurricane Fiona. So what we do at Hurricane City is take the best track data from the National Hurricane Center and calculate it day by day by day. And these are the 5-day errors on all of the models that are put into the best track program. Now, not every model is represented because, like, for example, the ICON model, which has become the new kind of darling in the tracking industry because of its great track projection of Hurricane Ian. It was probably one of the more accurate, if not the most accurate on track for Fiona, but it's not in the best track data. So I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Ian. Never mind. I'm talking Fiona right now. I got my hurricanes mixed up. But I'm sorry. Let me start over again. That's Ian. We'll get to that in a minute. Fiona. Back to Ian, though, the very best models were the ensemble models. So the best on Fiona was the AEM2 here at the top. And this model really did an excellent job. I mean, we're talking error rate of only 67.9 miles at 5 days, which is outstanding. And you can see it got better with time. So it started out, naturally, the lighter the greens, and when you get into the reds, would mean a poorer performance. And then as you get darker green, it's better. So as time moved on, the AEM2 model, the ensemble model, got better with time on the track as time went by. But look here, the National Hurricane Center was number 2 on the, not from the advisories, that's from the official ATCF system. But nevertheless, still very good here, number 2. The model that I've been favoring lately is the UK Met model right here. This model has been so good the last few years, not particularly on intensity, but on track. It's really, really good on track. Again, in intensity, it's pretty poor. But anyway, you get the gist here, that as you go down the list, it goes from best to worst. And again, if you look at that Canadian model down here, it did terribly. And see, it had red up there, and the UK Met started out really bad too, but then it improved. Canadian got into the white zone, but still off by 233 miles compared to the UK Met, which cut that in half. So, the UK Met model is really, that's the one you really need to watch for track on these systems. And of course, the Euro did pretty good. It's right in the middle of the pack. And these tropical models, they don't usually do so well on track. They're not really that good on track, but they do pretty well on intensity. But the H-Mon slightly outdid the H-Wharf on the track for Hurricane Fiona. And of course, the global model, the AVN, which is better known as the GFS, terrible. Down right near the bottom with the Canadian, off by 165 miles. That's the difference of, let's see, the Fiona, that would be the difference between Ponce getting basically gust to hurricane force and barely getting anything, 165 miles off. So that's a big stretch difference on the track performance from the GFS model. All right. Here is Hurricane Ian, which was the big story of the year. And let me check any messages that may have come in here. Let's see. Northern part of the Atlantic Ocean was warmer than it should have been. That is true. And Tropical Atlantic, I guess, is in there. Cool. Again, I got to thank Chris. I mean, Chris Hollis from Tropical Atlantic, he does a lot of behind the scenes, especially with the best track data and the Hurricane Hunter program that shows up at Hurricane City. When you go to the front page right below the tracking map, you can get all these really interesting stuff that's in there. Between myself and Chris, I've done a lot of the GIS maps, and Chris has done the Hurricane Hunters and the best track data. Just a fantastic job. Again, thanks to Chris. And by the way, we'll speak about this in a minute, but Chris, man, that guy had to evacuate his house. He lives right on the north shore of Tampa Bay, and his house would have been annihilated. Had Ian come into Tampa or just north of Tampa, it would have been game over for his house. He would have been underwater. And I'm sure he's thankful. He evacuated it. I think he lives there with his father, and I don't know who else lives in the house, but they got out of there and took the safe route, and luckily he was able to come back into town and have his house intact, no damage. And that goes for everybody in Tampa, by the way. You were staring that thing in the eye, and you dodged that bullet, man. And, I know a lot of people in Tampa are thankful that they didn't have to deal with that hurricane. You could tell, a lot of the, little Tom Brady's out there doing public information commercials on donating. The Tampa Bay, the professional teams are active in helping the recovery for the partners down, for the residents south of there that took the brunt of that hurricane. Areas in Port Charlotte, Fort Myers, Sanibel Island, down into Naples. It's just horrific damage down there, and a lot of lives lost. We had last time I heard, it might be 150 people dead. It started out here on September 19th, and it rode low. It was Dragon Acre, as I like to say, and it went through the Windward Islands, and then kind of kept going west, and that's when people in southeast Florida over here were breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief, because I always start to think if they don't get near the Caymans over here, then we're free and clear usually. It's not always the case, but I like to use that as a guideline, like this basic 80-degree west line. If it gets past there, we're pretty safe, at least from getting the right front quad of a storm surge situation in southeast Florida. And so there was a threat to the Caymans. There was a threat to Jamaica at one point over Ian. And then it strengthened and hit Isle of Youth, Cuba, and went just west of Havana, far enough to where it kept the core of the highest winds out of Havana, Cuba. Became a major hurricane in the southeast Gulf of Mexico. We had temperatures around 90 degrees down there. And then on September 28th, it became nearly a Category 5 hurricane. And I know there are people out there that are pushing for this to be upgraded to a Category 5, and I completely disagree with that. I do not see any indication of this being a Category 5. You've got to realize, when those hurricane hunters are flying out there, they're flying the most intense cell or cells around the eye wall, and they report that as the winds in the hurricane, but that's only for the highest, the deepest, reddest convection around the eye wall. So the majority of the eye wall is not 150-mile-per-hour winds. It's just a couple of small cells which may rotate around the eye and pop up and disintegrate or diminish and then re-intensify with those 150-mile-per-hour winds. But it's a very small area. And I would also mention, usually that those winds are elevated around 100 feet off the ground. So you're going to have, if you're into condominiums, you're going to get those winds of maybe 150 miles per hour if you get that cell passing over you. But the majority of the people got Category 3 and Category 4 winds. In fact, a lot of the storm chasers I saw they were in Port Charlotte. There was a few down in Fort Myers area. The surge was tremendous, make no doubt about it, but I didn't see any indication of Category 5 winds or anything close to that. So I don't think that that's going to fly, the Category 5 talk. It will be a Cat 4, more than likely, although I got to show you some more images here. So here's the core as it passed over Port Charlotte and headed towards Arcadia. At this point, the hurricane was 150 miles per hour, and this was at 4 p.m. in the afternoon as the eye was moving on shore. And again, that donut, that red donut, are the sustained winds of major hurricane force within the big fat red donut here, and then the skinny red line are up to hurricane force winds, but not necessarily major. And then, of course, the aqua circle out here represents gusts up to hurricane force out in here. So it was a pretty large system, and this will be added to my how big was it page for each hurricane in the past. It shows how large it was next to the state of Florida, and this will be added during the off season. In fact, that's when I do a lot of my calculations, database updates. All the updates to Hurricane City take place during the off season, and then when the season starts, I don't have to update anything. I just update each page to represent that they've currently been impacted, but the stats don't get updated until the off season. But again, a pretty large core of major hurricane force winds. So here's a damage shot from Fort Myers, and I mean that's just tremendous damage. I'm sure a lot of the condominium windows broke out, but look at the surge, what it did to this mobile home park. Tremendous damage, and I went there to retrieve my cameras that I set up in Arcadia. And I figured, I had my brother-in-law with me, and I decided, well, let's go take a look at the damage over in the hardest hit areas. So we got over there. Naturally, there was a roadblock leading to the beaches. You couldn't get in there yet. But the damage leading just up to the bridges that go over the waterway toward the beaches was tremendous. I mean, gigantic yachts out in the middle of the road. Mobile homes completely destroyed. Most of the mobile homes, even if they weren't destroyed, they had heavy roof damage and siding damage on them. In fact, the one mobile home park that we went through there was not one mobile home park that didn't have serious damage to one mobile home unit rather that didn't have serious damage to it. So, those mobile homes are not made for hurricanes, obviously, and anybody that stayed there, it had to be horrifying if you were staying in one of those mobile homes. And I would have to think that some of those deaths were people that were riding them out in mobile homes. I saw it in Hurricane Michael up in Callaway, Florida, when I was in Hurricane Michael. I saw people riding out in mobile homes. They had big huge trees around them, and the trees somewhat buffeted them from those highest winds. But in this case, in this picture, this is storm surge damage. So, and staying in a mobile home is not advisable, whether it's wind or surge. You're just not going to survive. But Bill Phillips was going to be with me, and I said earlier he had a lot of traveling and got back late and really couldn't be on the show tonight. But he was talking about that skinny black line. We can't focus on the skinny black line, and I know everybody's focused on that. is not to try to deflect from the skinny black line, but let's face it, that's what people look at when they see that cone of error. They're looking at the center of the cone, and that's what where they believe that the worst of it is going to be. And in this case, and I put a graphic up earlier, and I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but I think what they should do to the cone is make it red on the right side of the cone, and then leave it white on the left side of the cone, meaning the red part of the cone is what people should really be freaking out over and saying, you know what, I'm getting out of Dodge. Now, of course, if the track shifts left, then you could shift that red area into the left side of the cone. But the red area would indicate that's the trend in which way the cone is shifting, and to let people know that's where the worst conditions are going to be. I think that's a good idea to add to the cone. But, Bill also mentioned there needs to be more education on the dangers for local officials, such as the sheriff in Lee County that decided, well, I'm not going to make a mandatory evacuation for my people, which was a horrible mistake. And by the way, the governor gave him cover. I'm not going to get into the political aspects of it. That was a completely blown call. It was a completely blown call. Everybody was focused on Tampa, and I'm just hoping there were enough people and emergency personnel that were getting the word out, the local news. I'm not sure how the local news covered it 24, 48 hours out. If in Fort Myers, I would love to hear how they were covering it, like saying to people, you need to evacuate regardless of the fact that the track is showing it going into Tampa. These are things to be discussed, and I don't know how the local media handled it over there. All right. Now here is the radar as Hurricane Ian was coming towards Cape Coral, and you can see the convection is all on the left side. Now this is important because again, when you saw the hurricane hunters were flying out in this area, out in here, that's where they were finding those 150 mile per hour winds. So probably this whole orange and red area were probably winds near 150, 140, 150. But over here, not so much. These were probably winds of around 100, 120. So it's a big difference. And then as this moved on shore, the reds and the oranges remained out over the open water out here. So again, I don't know if I buy the fact that this was even a category 4 hurricane I'm having a problem with, especially when it comes to areas like, Fort Myers, out in the proper area out west, Cape Coral. I don't know that they saw winds they might have had some gusts to category 4, no doubt about that. But I still think that the majority of the 140, 150 mile, if there was on land, happened right out here. I believe these are the areas that got the 140, 150 mile per hour winds. And I don't know if any of you remember back in the early days of the internet when we had the message boards, Storm 96 and Storm Decay, and I had a message board at Hurricane City, and everybody was on message boards. This was before social media. And there was a guy on there named Thomas Magula, a.k.a. A great one, right? And so this guy was always on there like, I want a major, I want a major, I want a major. He lives in this area. He lives over in I think in the Naples, Fort Myers area, somewhere down in here. So he was like blowing my email up. It was so bad. Here's a video. Do you think it was a Cat 5, Jim? Because he's always about Cat 5s. And I said, no, it wasn't a Cat 5. And he started complaining about, I have no power. My water is out. It's like, dude, come on. This is what you wanted this. Like, anybody that wants this, you can't seriously complain when your power goes out God forbid anything worse than that. You can't complain about what happens when you're asking for this year after year. But anyway, he was all over this. I want a Cat 5. I want to see what it'll do. Well, guess what? You got to see what it'll do. And he's still complaining about things and trying to, he's finally come down off the Cat 5 talk. But just be careful what you ask for sometimes is all I'm saying. And let that be a lesson. You know, people, a lot of these kids on Twitter are just like, you can see it. They're grappling hook the hurricanes. They're dragging them into their hometown. They're using the models that are terrible to justify saying, I want this hurricane to come into my hometown because I want to see what it's like. And I can tell you right now, all these people in this area right here are reeling. They've lost their homes. They've lost their belongings. They've lost friends and relatives to this hurricane. This was horrific. And by the way, I want to put a congratulations out to the guy that put the video up. And now his name is slipping my mind. He put the video up in Fort Myers Beach and showed the house coming up off its foundation and floating away. And you know, that was Max Olson. That was his name. So he did a fantastic job. And you know, that's what I was heading over there to do. And that's the hardest part about not getting my cameras over there is I intended to get that kind of a shot. That's why I do what I do. And he actually not only got the video of the house coming off its foundation, but he was able to actually help the people that lost everything they owned in that hurricane. They had their dogs in that house with them. I think it was a husband and wife and their dogs. And they all survived. No, I don't know if the dogs survived. I think they did. I'm not quite 100% sure. But Max Olson helped them out, which is a noble thing to do. He helped them out financially and, you know, helped them to get back on their feet. And since their house was the product of some amazing video. But anyway, I didn't make it over there. I set my cameras up in Arcadia. So here are the models on Hurricane Ian. This is when it was way south of the Dominican Republic. And the aviation ensemble model number 2, and I don't like to talk about ensemble models because there's like hundreds of them between the Euro and the GFS and the Canadian ensembles and everything. It'd make your head explode. But that one particular model, these were the best performers at the time. I like to keep track of the best performers as a system is developing and as it's on the move. So this was the map as it was developing as a tropical storm, becoming a hurricane. It was way before it became a hurricane, but this is when it was a tropical storm. And I got to tell you, look at that. The consensus models, the TVCA and the TVCE were right there. I mean, the TVCE was Sarasota. That's pretty damn close to what, and this is way out there. This is like 4 days out. So that's pretty good, those consensus models. And then, of course, the aviation, the GFS model was way out here, heading in the direction of maybe Tampa or north of Tampa. The HMON, look at that tropical model, had it going way up north of Tampa. And the Canadian model was out here in La La Land, spinning around out here in the southeast Gulf of Mexico. So, you know, the best performing models have there's something to be said about the best performing models if you do like I do and keep track of such things. You know, these aviation ensembles, a couple of them did pretty good. Unfortunately, the GFS didn't pay attention to the AP02, or maybe there wasn't enough consensus models taking it over South Florida for the GFS to acknowledge it and shift the model further to the right. But, you know, my question is to the National Hurricane Center. And you know, I'm going to show you the best performers in just a minute here, but the National Hurricane Center has this reluctance, and it drives me crazy. Most of their cone of error is based on the best performing models. If you look at the front page of Hurricane City, the GIS map, during an active system, you will notice that almost always the best performing models are within the cone. So, with that said, in Hurricane Ian, and I'll show you this in a minute, the European model and the ICON model were consistently, and the UK Met, were consistently the best performing models on track as it was heading towards Florida. And they, instead of looking at those models and leaning heavily on those models and saying, you know what, this thing's going to hang a hard right-hand turn, they were stubbornly sticking with the GFS and the tropical models, which were taking it more towards the Tampa area. So I think they used their own methodology and basically ignored it. And it drives me crazy at times. And I'm always harping on the best performing models on my shows, on the pre-hurricane shows and all that stuff. And it's like, it's just, people, I don't know how to explain it. I put a lot of work into figuring that out, and I post it on social media, and it just gets crickets, man. Everybody just gets focused on a graphic of 950 millibars over Tampa or something, and they run with that. And I'm sitting here saying, hold on a minute, the best performing models aren't really showing that, and it's just, my head explodes at times. I just sometimes step back from social media and I shake my head and I go, you know what? I should just shut up and just not say anything. It's not worth it. It's just, it is what it is. All right. So here are the best performing models on Hurricane Ian. Now notice at the very top, and again, green is good and red is bad. And the darker the green, the better the track. And the TVCA and the TVCN, which are consensus models. Now, they consist of the GFS model, the UK Met model, the HWFI, the EMXI, the CTC, and the EMNI, which are basically interpolated models of the basic mainstream models, right? All put together as one, and that's why they're called a consensus. You know, it's you take the group think and then put it together as one model versus the models individually, and generally the consensus is going to have a better handle on things. But the consensus was by far the best, off by 133.5 miles at 5 days. Look at what's number 2. The best individual model was the UK Met model. It started out a little hairy there in the red zone, and then, bam, did the second best. The UK Met model is my favorite model of all the individual models on track. It just is really good on track over the past several years. And then there's the National Hurricane Center. Now, we know there's criticism of the black line, as Bill said, down the center of the cone. But the Hurricane Center overall 5-day track forecast was pretty damn good. It's just that 24-hour period before landfall, they just didn't bite enough on the UK Met and the Euro. And I think they should have weighted that a little heavier. I really do. You know, why didn't they lean more on the consensus models? I really believe they lean too much on the GFS. And look what's all the way down at the bottom, the GFS. It did the worst on Hurricane Ian, off by 229.9 miles in 5 days. It did okay for a while there, and then it dropped off the cliff when it got near the Florida coastline. And the European didn't do very good either. It was on it, and then. But at the end of the day, the UK Met, I mean, the National Hurricane Center, they've got to, remember how, I don't know if you guys remember this, Don Shula, back when he coached the Dolphins, the late Don Shula, if there was a player that would fumble the ball, the coach would make him sleep with the football, so he wouldn't fumble it. You know, he would grab that football and hold on to it all night, and somebody would come in and check on the guy to make sure he was still holding on to that football in his sleep. That's how obsessed Don Shula was with guys fumbling footballs. He wanted to make sure they wouldn't fumble. He'd make them sleep with the football. I think maybe the Hurricane Center needs to sleep with the UK Met model. You know, let's tuck it under their pillow or something, or tuck it underneath all the forecasters, like, put UK Met stickers on their walls or something. And maybe I'm being too hard on the Hurricane Center. Look, I'm just kidding around here, but I mean, that's what I always think about is put the UK Met models in their houses at home, just so it reminds them when they come back on their shift at the National Hurricane Center to pay attention to the UK Met model, because it's been pretty damn good on track. Now, intensity is a whole different ballgame. It sucks on intensity. It's usually one of the weaker models on intensity, but man, that model on track is pretty damn good. All right. Oh, by the way, let me check on the comments. We've had a lot of people commenting. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, Tropical Land. Chris is listening. You're welcome. Tampa did get lucky with Ian. Even someone they interviewed from the NHC tonight on the local news said, yeah, they did. They got extremely lucky, man. I mean, that's and again, thanks, Chris, for all your help. TropicalAtlantic.com. That link is at the top of Hurricane City. Let me get my image up here while I'm talking to you all. Let's see. Let's see. Everyone, here's another comment from Chris. Everyone that gets lucky must realize that eventually you're not going to be. That's why you have to evacuate every time. I know some people in my neighborhood that would have regretted not evacuating. Oh my God. It would have been disastrous, man. I think the death toll would have been probably at least 100 more than what it was had it come into Tampa. Simply because there's probably so many people around Tampa Bay that decided to stay there around that bay, and they would have been just annihilated by storm surge. It would have been horrific. We don't know how lucky we are that didn't happen. Isn't the start of a Cat 5 too high? Start of a Cat 5. Yes. I mean, it's 155, right? 156. Actually, it's got to be 160 to be Cat 5. It was 150. I just don't see him making it a Cat 5. And this wasn't even low end, anything close to low end. I just don't, All right, Chuck, but then there aren't Category 5s that often. I don't think there should be any changes to make them happen more frequently. Well, I think that's up to Mother Nature to decide that. There shouldn't be mobile homes at the coast. Absolutely. Anyone moving into a hurricane-prone area must learn about hurricanes, including the cone, and people who live in wait a minute. People live in one already need to make sure that they understand it. That is true. Paul writes, WBBH and WFTX were warning folks to get out, even if it wasn't going to directly hit Fort Myers. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, let's get back to the images. All right, so all right, then we had Nicole. This was a late season storm. And back to let me go back a couple of images. So yeah, we'll go on this one. So for those of you, and I wasn't going to play it tonight because I don't think it's really relevant. The video wasn't that amazing, but I did leave my two cameras after I got smashed to oblivion in Arcadia. I left my two cameras up on telephone poles in Arcadia, right near the police department, where I was left with whatever I had left from the accident. And notice there's a lot of snidely comments coming out here. But anyway, the cameras did survive. I grabbed them out of the wreck and put them up. I figured, you know what? I'm here. I might as well put them up where I'm at, even though I had no transportation or anything. I might as well put them up in Arcadia. And sure enough, the eye passed right over Arcadia. It passed over with winds of around 100 miles per hour. And the eye, it did get the calm of the eye. And it did measure 86 miles per hour, the anemometer cam I have. And unfortunately, when I found the camera, it was wrapped in a banner. Apparently one of these advertisement banners found its way and wrapped itself around it. It seems like these cups, every time I put this anemometer up somewhere in a hurricane, something always whacks it, like either wraps itself around it or whacks it and puts it out of commission. So it may, it wasn't even, the camera went offline, by the way. Bill's camera, which is a magnetic camera, stayed up through the entire storm. on one of those traffic mass cams and caught some amazing video as well. But it stayed up. Mine, somehow the battery, it got wet, or when that banner hit it, it whacked it and put it out of commission. But anyway, those videos are on the video archive page at Hurricane City. You use the drop-down menus and go to video archives, and it's all the past shows. And that clip is about 1.5 minutes long, showing clips from those cameras. It caught power flashes. It caught tree branches getting flown down the road. Police, first responders zooming back and forth, going to special emergencies during the hurricane. So it's kind of fun to watch a little bit of what happened there. And of course, it happened in the middle of the night in the pitch dark, so there is night vision on those, but it caught what it caught. It was the best I could do under the circumstances. So I just wanted to mention that before I get on to Nicole. All right, so here is Nicole, late season storm. Here we are, November 5th. It begins as a tropical depression down in the Caribbean, Central Caribbean, south of Hispaniola. Tropical depression over Puerto Rico, and then it becomes Tropical Storm Nicole. And at this time, some of the models were getting funky. I remember seeing, at that time, the models were saying South Florida, like some were taking it into the Upper Keys and Miami, and people had to be thinking, oh my God. And then some of them had it becoming a pretty intense hurricane. There were a couple of runs where it had it as a major hurricane, believe it or not. But the models finally stabilized, and they pretty much nailed this track, which showed going over Great Abaco Island and Grand Bahama Island, which incidentally are the most hit areas in the Atlantic Basin by hurricanes only. Not all named storms, but by hurricanes only. Grand Bahama Island and Great Abaco are by far the most hit, not only by hurricanes, but by majors in general. And speaking of which, Wayne Neely wrote a book on Hurricane Dorian. He's the forecaster out there in the Bahamas that's an author on hurricanes, and he's written a bunch of hurricanes on bunch of books on hurricanes that have hit the Bahamas, going all the way back to the 1900. He's written a ton of books. I have a bunch of his books over here on the shelf, and he was gracious enough to include my statistics in his latest book on Hurricane Dorian, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. I ordered the book, and it's forwarded by Max Mayfield, and it's all about Hurricane Dorian, so I'm looking forward to reading that. Wayne Neely, the new book out on Hurricane Dorian, so check that out on Amazon. He's got his books all on Amazon. So anyway, and getting off the tracks here, so it did hit the Northwest Bahama, the most hit area in the entire Atlantic Basin. Then it came into Vero Beach as a Category 1 hurricane in the middle of the night on November 10th. And, I was not there because naturally my vehicle was destroyed, so I set my cameras up in where I thought the center would come in, which was right. It was in Vero Beach. I was in North Hutchinson Island. I set up one camera in North Hutchinson Island and the other camera down in Vero Beach, or no, it was down in Fort Pierce. So I had two cameras up. Neither one of them caught much of anything because, quite frankly, this hurricane had mainly tropical storm force winds on land. And if there were any hurricane force winds, it was a very, very small sliver of coastline that had hurricane force winds. It had a very large eye, reminded me of like a Wilma type eye. It was like, I think at 1.50 miles wide, the eye of Hurricane Nicole. And it passed over, and all of the worst effects from Hurricane Nicole were the onshore flow here of all these wave and surge action coming in to the Daytona Beach area. A bunch of homes got washed away on the coastline, which were previously eroded by Hurricane Ian, which came up like this. So you had the double whammy here of two hurricanes impacting this northeast coastline of Florida, which eventually led to all the houses collapsing into the Atlantic. But overall, as far as intensity is concerned, I mean, Nicole was obviously much lesser than Hurricanes Fiona and Ian. But, a lot of the same areas got impacted. Believe it or not, we had Fort Myers and Port Charlotte was brushed by Hurricane Nicole, or it was a tropical storm rather. It did impact this, so you can count 2 impacts for Fort Myers and Port Charlotte in the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. Then those will be updated in the city rankings during the off season. In fact, I believe this area will also be counted as 2 strikes from Ian and Nicole, of course. So there were a lot of double impacts, most of Florida was double impacted this year by named storms. But the Bahamas really had a quiet season this year. The majority inside that circle there, very quiet hurricane season. I mean, it's very unusual for the Bahamas. The Bahamas get hit about every other year by a named storm, and a hurricane about once every 3 or 4 years they get hit by a hurricane. So they got off relatively good this year. I mean, comparing it to Dorian, look, what Nicole did in the Bahamas, there was some wind damage and whatnot, a little bit of surge flooding, but nothing like Dorian. I mean, completely different animal. All right, so let's go to our next image. Now look at these models. This is amazing. Again, these are the consensus models, the TVCA, the RVCN, the DRCL. These are all consensus models. And look at that. You couldn't get a better track. I mean, the actual hurricane was, and again, this was when it was way out there. It predicted this. So, the actual track was more like this. And then it came up in here like that. So, I mean, that's pretty, actually, let me change color ink here. You probably can't even see that. Let's see. Yeah, go yellow. So, the actual track was like this. Right over Grand Bahama Island. And then went northwest. And it did this kind of a track. I mean, it's pretty amazing, the actual track of Hurricane Nicole versus what the models said 4 and 5 days out. And again, I post these kind of things on social media and it gets crickets. I just don't get it. I'm perplexed. I'm giving people a crystal ball. I mean, I'm not the one inventing these models, or I'm not any better at deciphering these models than anybody else. However, I do the best performers and I map them. And that's something you don't see a lot of people doing on the internet. And I mean, man, you can't get a better track than this. I mean, it's just outstanding. The consensus models are fantastic. All right, so this I found rather interesting. I don't like picking on any individual, but the reason I'm mentioning Joe Bastardi in this post is this guy, man. First of all, he's a climate denier. He doesn't believe that global warming is anything to be concerned about, and that it has nothing to do with CO2 and blah blah. It's the same arguments. Look, and I've lost respect for the guy a long time ago. A long time ago, I had him on my show. The Weather in the Media shows that I used to do years ago. I had, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Weather in the Media show. Correction. It was the Barometer Bob show, which goes even further back, when I had Barometer Bob and he had his own show on my network. And we interviewed Joe Sobel and Joe Bastardi from, at that point, AccuWeather, and we had them on. And we had a big argument about global warming, and it was kind of an uncomfortable conversation. Anyway, that's in the archives. You can probably find that on the archive page. But anyway, he said, I expect this hurricane to... Now, look at the position where Nicole is. It is, it's right here, just northeast of Great Abaco Island as a Category 1 hurricane, just about to become a Category... I think it was right at a Category 1 in this shot. And he's saying it's going to drop. And it was 985 at the point at where it is right in this satellite shot. So he was saying it was going to drop another 10 to 20 millibars. Now, if this had dropped 20 millibars, that would be 965 millibars. 965 millibars is Category 3. Okay? It came nowhere close to that. And there's so many people on the internet that love this guy. They're like sharing his stuff and they're passing it around and they're like, what? I'm looking at this, and my friend John Martell sent me this, and hello John, if you're watching out there tonight, he sends me all the Joe Bastardi stuff, and it's like, dude, I like, leave me alone with the Joe Bastardi stuff. I don't care what this guy has to say. He's wrong far more than he's right. I mean, it's just terrible stuff. But I mean, to say that he thought this was going to drop 20 millibars when there was dry air intrusion and the temperatures were moderate at best. I mean, we're talking 84, 80, 83, 82 degree temperatures. I mean, nothing, not like it was in the Gulf for Ian. So for him to think that this was going to become Ian or something was crazy. It was crazy. So next time you see the Joe Bastardi stuff out there, just take it with a grain of salt. I know people are going to say, well, leave him alone. He's got his right to... Yeah, but I mean, dude, you got people's lives at stake and you're making crazy comments like that. It's alarmism at its worst, completely. So this image here, this got passed around all over the internet after Hurricane Nicole hit. And I find it ironic because, I mean, the paths are very similar to where they crossed. I mean, one was a little closer to the East Coast this year than it was back in 2004 when Charlie and Gene crossed paths. They weren't active at the same time. I'm not saying they crossed paths. That would be kind of fun, actually, to see. Well, it wouldn't be fun for the people impacted, but it would be interesting. Could you imagine if Charlie, well, let's just say Ian and Nicole, like, were active at the same time and actually crossed paths? Like, I know there would be a Fujiwara effect, which is the weaker of the two would rotate around the bigger system. So Nicole would literally rotate around Ian and get absorbed into Ian, which is the Fujiwara effect. But it would just be fun to see something like that near the state of Florida simply from a meteorological perspective, to see what would happen. I mean, this would just be crazy. Talk about social media going bonkers. But no, this isn't what happened. This was Ian and Nicole later in the season, and how similar they were to 2004 when Charlie and Gene did basically the same thing. But what begs the question here is, and I mentioned on several people's Facebook pages, by the way, I would love to hear from somebody on Facebook. I hope we're live on Facebook. I know I was on my timeline, and you can comment on my timeline, so I'm wondering if that's able to be shown up on the comments. And if you can't comment from there, you can always go to the YouTube broadcast and comment from there. But anyway, I commented on several people's pages about next year. Like, remember, after 2004, we had that barn burner of 2005 Atlantic hurricane season where we had 26 named storms, folks. Could we see that because this happened this year with Nicole and Ian? I mean, it's an interesting question. And it'll be interesting to see next year if we have a barn burner season, because that would yet lead to another concept of past historic tracks coming to fruition. In other words, stats and return rates and patterns do mean something. And it's just something to keep an eye on next year. I'm not saying we're going to have 26 named storms, but I think if we have a really active season next year and we have like 19, 20, 21 named storms, I think you got to look back at this graphic and go, you know what? I'm going to start paying attention to past tracks and extrapolate it into the future and start thinking maybe this does mean something. Just saying. Just saying. And finally, this was really disappointing. So, you can probably read this clear enough on your screen. I was covering Hurricane Ian. Of course, Bill and I were tag teaming privately and whatnot, and covering Hurricane Ian, grabbing anything I could find on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And I made my archive. Now, I don't think it was about the archive. I think it was about the actual live broadcast I did covering Hurricane Ian, because I wasn't there and I had to come home and cover it from here. Apparently, Reed Timmer had an issue with that. I get this email that they've removed all my live streams from Facebook because I used one of Reed Timmer's videos that was no more than maybe 30 seconds. And it was on Twitter, by the way. And that's public broadcasting. That's a public video. But nevertheless, okay, let's take the pettiness out of this, because I know that the reason these guys put the do not broadcast, not the rebroadcast on their live streams is because they don't want the mainstream media, the people that are actually making money at this, they don't like them using their videos to do a show. I get it. I understand it completely. However, I don't know whether Reed Timmer knew that I was in a bad accident on the way to the West Coast or not. But even if he didn't know, and I'm just a guy I'm a little guy, and comparatively speaking on social media, I'm a little guy that covers these hurricanes. Go back over 20 years I've been doing this. I cover all the hurricanes, most of them anyway, that are hitting landfall, and I try to bring up all the multimedia that I can find and weather observations, radar, satellite, blah, 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 and do this every single hurricane season. He's got to know that I'm not making any money at this, bro. If you look at all the years that I've been on the internet doing hurricane coverage, I'm lucky if I've made a couple $1,000s in all the years that I've been doing this. And that money went right back into the project. So to sit there and worry about getting $20 out of me or 50 or whatever he thinks he can siphon out of me, I lost all respect for this guy. All respect. Now, he could argue that wasn't me, that's some kind of an automated system or some bullshit like that. He could. I contacted him directly. He didn't respond to me. He could have said, "Sorry, Jim, that was just an automated thing. Don't worry about it, or just don't let it happen again." That would have been the more proper way to handle it. Just contact me privately and say, "Jim, don't use my video anymore. I understand what you're doing, but please, whatever." Which I still think is stupid, because look, if the media wants this video bad enough, they're going to pay them for it, whether I stream it or not. Because my little pixelated stream that's being redone on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else nobody can grab that and use it anyway. It's so bad and so pixelated that nobody could possibly use it. So I don't understand this petty shit. I really don't get it. The media that's going to pay for that video, they're going to want a clean, clear copy with no crap all over it anyways. So what difference does it make? What does he think I'm making? Like, he must think I'm making $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year. Like, that's crazy. It's just stupid. Let it go. This is why I hate the Chase community as a whole, because they're so overly protective of their videos. And let's face it, if somebody wants their video bad enough, they're going to pay them for it. They're not going to grab it off my stream that's all pixelated and re-streamed. So just stop it with this garbage. It's dumb, especially when you post it on Twitter. I'm going through my Twitter feed to show all the different videos. Some people are taking cell phone videos. Some people are, they have a security camera out in front of their house. Some are these webcams that are available on the World Wide Web. What am I supposed to cipher? I can't use this, but I can use that. I can't use it. Just stop it already. It's 30-second clips. I skip all over the place. I don't sit on any one person for any length of time. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This do not broadcast shit. And I'm sick of it, and it's my big pet peeve of this show. Forget the accident. That's a whole other thing. But this kind of garbage is just unacceptable. So I would recommend anybody that follows Reed Timmer, don't follow him anymore. This guy is a major ass. Do not do it. This guy is just off this rocker, man. I mean, who gets in front of somebody's house anyway? The house is falling apart, and all their belongings are being tracked out. Scream and yell like you're on crack or something. I don't understand it. I really don't get it at all. I don't care what he does and how he does it and where he goes, whatever. Just leave me alone. As a small-time broadcaster with 10 people watching, leave me alone. I'm not paying you $50 for your stupid video. And that's it. I'm pissed about that crap. That's the thing that really frosted me when I got that in the aftermath of that hurricane. I did not need to see this crap. So anyway. All right, back to camera. Whoops. What did I do here? So anyway, let me see if there's any more comments. That's to say you're not a multi-million-dollar corporation. Thank you, Chris. I mean, thank you. I mean, I have enough trouble staying in this project doing this without that kind of garbage. I just don't need it. So now, and here's the other thing. People that want to criticize me for going out into the storms, what right do you have? You're not a storm chaser. You're not with LSM. You're not with, these other groups of guys that go out and sell their videos. Like, wait a minute. You're telling me I'm not allowed to restream anything, which I've been doing for like 20 years, and I'm not allowed to do so. The only choice I have is to go into the storm and produce the video myself, right? But you're going to criticize me for that too? Come on, man. Just stop it with this. I'm so over it with these storm chasers, man. It's like, here's the newest one they were complaining about today. The drone footage. Some guy posted on there, do you think it should count as seeing a tornado if your drone sees the tornado? Like, it doesn't really count as you seeing a tornado because only your drone saw the tornado. That's the same as saying, if you set a remote camera up in a hurricane and you weren't in the hurricane, then you weren't in the hurricane. Only your camera was in the hurricane. This is where the stupidity is just run amok on social media. That's why I can't take it anymore. It's just full of stupidity. And I'm trying to alert people, entertain people, give them the stats, people that move to Florida or wherever else from, it just gives them a general education of what hurricanes do, how often they come back, how they get, the database is beautiful. It's got videos and radars and tracks and everything you would need to know about the history of the city you live in. And I'm never going to stop doing that, but I got to tell you something, man. The mental drain on this whole thing has been crazy. But anyway, I'm going to leave you with this. I wish the people in Southwest Florida and Puerto Rico and Nova Scotia the best of luck in a recovery. I think it's pretty much cleaned up in Nova Scotia. The power's all back. They got a pretty good infrastructure. Puerto Rico's in really bad shape. I just hope they get that fixed. And Southwest Florida, listen, the state of Florida has the best emergency response of anybody in the country, maybe even the world. The Florida Department of Emergency Management, the conferences that are here in Florida, the emergency awareness, the awareness of the public messaging and everything is probably better than anywhere else. The infrastructure is second to none. Florida has great infrastructure, a lot of underground cabling and metal poles and cement poles and, a lot of redundancy going on. So the recovery was fantastic. They were able to rebuild the bridge in 2 weeks to get the people out on the island. Compare that to Katrina, it's day and night. I mean, Florida is fantastic at what they do in recovering from hurricanes. So it'll still be a long haul for these people, though. And regardless of how fast they recovered, 150 people died. Most of those in Southwest Florida. The infrastructure, it's in the billions. The insurance company is going to take a huge hit from this, and everybody's insurance rates are going to go up. All I suggest to people is fortify your home. Understand how often hurricanes hit your community. Get familiar with it. Go to my database and look up your city and get familiar with how often they happen and return rates and everything else, and you'll learn a lot there. And as far as next hurricane season, I don't know anything yet. I really don't. I mean, this situation has taxed me mentally and physically. I'm going to be getting some work done on my back in the coming weeks. It's knocked me for a loop. I just don't know what next year holds. I don't know if I'm going to even head out. I just don't know. So stay tuned. I'll update all the stats on Hurricane City in the off season. Now I'll reevaluate things next year, and we'll go from there. So anyway, that's it, folks. Thank you for watching tonight. I'll have the archive available on the archive page. Share the word about Hurricane City. Let's keep it going as long as we can, and just tell people about it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Social media, I'm going to probably stick around on Facebook, Twitter. On a 1 to 10, 1 being I'm staying, 10 being I'm leaving, it's probably an 8 at this point. I got to see how things work during the off season, and I may simplify things even further and just focus on, Facebook, YouTube, and do it that way. We'll see what happens. All right, folks. Good night, and thanks for watching. Appreciate everybody, and good luck in your recoveries.